I want to welcome everybody tonight. It is Thursday, the 12th of February, 2026, and we have the honor of having Dr. Beth Hewett with us. She is a certified thanatologist, compassionate bereavement care specialist, certified critical incident stress management specialist, and a certified end-of-life doula. She is a public speaker and the author of Duty, Honor, Hope, Strategies for Understanding and Unpacking First Responder Grief, as well as Grief on the Road to EMOS, a monostatic approach to journey with the bereaved. Good words memorialize them through a eulogy, and good words practice activities for mourning. She's the co-author of Support in a Grieving Workforce. Dr. Hewitt's lifelong background in rhetoric and writing leads her to a thoughtful approach to communication and language as a basis for understanding life's stressors. She supports the bereaved as a grief coach, spiritual companion, grief support group facilitator, hospice bereavement volunteer, and facilitator trainer. Her work includes both pre and post death bereavement, healing ceremonies and rituals, and mindful mourning activities within and outside faith-based institutions. Some of her publications, including articles and blogs, can be found at www.goodwordsforgiven.com. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Hewett.
Thank you. And thank you all for your patience tonight. For some reason, my Zoom and my slides were not coordinating, and I had to bring in the hubby to help get that together. I'm happy to be here. I was privileged to talk with you a year ago in April of 2025. And I have maybe a few things to say that will be similar, but I'll be talking about something a little bit different tonight. And I think that it's really important to take good care of yourself psychologically, because we are talking about some things that can be challenging emotionally. Of course, there's always the crisis lifeline 988 if you feel like you need someone to talk to when we're finished tonight. But you can also open the chat and link right to the host, I think, and connect with the host and say that you'd like someone to talk with during or after. I want to break about halfway through where we can maybe talk a little bit together. And I ask that you have some paper if you're not in a car or a place where you can't write, but someplace where you could jot a couple of notes about some of the types of grief I'm going to discuss. Additionally, in the chat will appear maybe more than once a link to a 3-page handout. And the 3-page handout will have the different kinds of losses that I'm talking about tonight, as well as some ways for talking with each other about grief. And finally, some information about 2 courses I'm teaching with ICISF. One is Foundations of Grief for First Responders, and the other one is Advanced Practices for healing first responder grief. And those 2 courses will happen in March. Additionally, there are 2 books. One is Duty, Honor, Hope, which is a course text for the advanced course, and also available online at ICISF, and a new book called Being Human, Being Strong. And that's about general grief that everybody gets that can be different and more difficult for first responders. That book is a course text for the Foundations course, and also will be available just for sale at ICISF's bookstore. Those are going to be ready in March, I believe. So, just to begin, the kind of work that I know you do is often very emotionally stressful. And I know this from what people have shared with me. For example, one of the people I interviewed was an EMT from New Jersey who shared with me that in one summer working at Atlantic City, she and her partner encountered the deaths of 17 children, all on different nights, different shifts, from the newest, youngest baby to 17-year-old. And during that same summer, she miscarried her own child, making everything much more challenging than she ever thought it would be. The death of children is especially hard, and I urge you and invite you to spend some time thinking about how to work with that. I have some suggestions for you. So let's see if I'm able to move my slides. There we go. So the beginning here was, I like what I'm doing, but it feels so heavy. What's wrong with me? And the idea is it could be grief. It could be grief. We know that trauma is something that people talk about a great deal, as they should. But in every trauma, there is grief. And grief is the way we feel and experience life when there is a loss. And the loss is sometimes a loss by death, but sometimes it's a loss of sense of self, a loss of values, core values, a loss of confidence. And sometimes it's a loss that's not a death, such as the loss of a friendship, a marriage, a relationship of another kind. So I say to you, what's wrong with me? Maybe it's what's right with you, because grief is an entirely appropriate experience, given the fact that you are human and that you have career work that is always putting you in touch with someone else's loss, someone else's bad day, and your own. And it causes you to need to address all of those things. So what we'll talk about tonight is we'll define grief versus post-traumatic stress, just to get some differences in there, and identify some characteristics of grief in first response, because maybe you will notice some in you. Highlight situations in which grief might reside. So in what I'm doing, how is it that I might recognize that I'm grieving rather than experiencing trauma alone? And then learn some strategies for working with the grief that will support you as well as others. I have a little thing about me, and we don't really need to go through that. Just know that I think I know what I'm doing here, and I hope you will feel the same way. You wear a lot of different hats in life, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that at different times, when you do any kind of training, you're being somebody. At most times, perhaps in this kind of training, you're a first responder, but you might also be a CISM peer or another professional who is responsible in some way for peer support. You could yourself be a critical incident survivor from however long ago, and that may still sit with you. And of course, you're an everyday person. You're just me and you, and we're just people who we don't go to the mall anymore, but we sure do go to the grocery store. So we do that kind of life stuff. I've recently become familiar with this term about living life on its own terms. And I had to chew on it and think about it for a while. I kind of don't like the term living life on its own terms, because it reminds me of when people say, oh, well, it is what it is. And it is what it is has always annoyed me, because if I liked what it is, I wouldn't be thinking about it the way I was. Nonetheless, there really is no other way to live life besides living it on its own terms or ignoring it. And so it seems to me to be better for the kind of work you do and the kind of work I do to recognize life's own terms. And that means that we have to understand what they are, and that grief is always going to be a part of life. It's natural, it's normal, it's necessary to human beings, and we're not going to get around it. Unfortunately, trauma is going to be part of your work life. And it's also very natural to the career fields you've chosen. And these are not tragic things, they're just human things. And if we can accept the terms of life, we can have more joy and a greater acceptance of our own capacity to love people, animals, and things. And a thing would be your career. If you love your career and you have a passion for it, then it may be disturbing when you think, I'm not feeling so passionate right now. I'm not feeling so good about it. I don't know what's wrong with me. And so if we take it from one principle of we're living life on its own terms and move to the next principle of I need to figure out what's not working well for me now, then we can proceed in some kind of a way to help figure out where am I, who am I, and what do I want. So life's terms as an everyday person, there are sorrows in life. I use the word sorrow very deliberately because my clients have taught me that everybody talks about sadness. We talk about being sad when the movie theater doesn't have the movie we want. We talk about being sad when we have an acute depression for some reason. We talk about being sad when we have a chronic depression, perhaps a clinical depression. We talk about being sad when somebody has died. But grief is more than just sad, it's also sorrowful. And for people who are really struggling with loss, if you would sort of switch out the word sad for sorrow and see how that fits with what you're feeling, you can get a sense of the degree with which you're experiencing grief in any one particular case or any one particular scenario. So there are losses at work, there are losses at home, there are disappointments in anybody's career. We don't always have good examples of how to handle grief, and that's a tough one, but that's because Western society isn't very good at it. It's pretty good at ignoring grief. And grief can be heavy, and that can be why sometimes you may feel heavy. And we may not process it, and so then we ignore it or put it away in some way and pretend that it's not there, which is not living life on its own terms. As a first responder, there are multiple traumas to process, sometimes multiple traumas in a day. Perhaps some days you have some quiet days, but there will be many traumas to process over the course of a career. Grief exists in all traumas, if you will just believe me on that. Your work life has its own losses, losses of life and experiences of confrontation. I mean confrontation with people, but I also mean confrontation with the problem of life and how that can be difficult when you're just not feeling it today. Shift work can be especially grueling and exhausting. I don't know how many hours you work on shift. I know some people work up to 12 hours, and that's quite a long time. But the more shift work you do, the more your sleep is thrown off, your internal resources are lowered, and you may have less opportunity to grab them and use them as you need to. And additionally, you have your own personal losses. So my research and interviews showed me that first responder grief is often accumulated and put in a container. And people told me in over 40 interviews that they put it in a box, a compartment, a bottle, a trunk, a drawer. a closet, an attic, a locker, behind a wall, in the garbage, in a file drawer, in a file, behind me, behind a curtain, or just I can't escape it, I can't get rid of it. So they try to put it away, the people that I've spoken with, in a dark place where it won't interfere with daily work and life. Understood. You cannot carry these things with you. Imagine picking up that trunk, sticking it on your shoulder, and trying to carry that into a fire. That's just not going to work. And it's not going to be helpful to even try to do that. You do have to put things away to a degree in order to do your work. Then you need to go back and do something with it. What happens when people don't resolve and work with these griefs, these losses that they experience, is they begin to struggle with substance abuse. You see more divorces, losses of friendships, and a sense of not even belonging in neighborhood activities because these people don't know what I go through every day. Sometimes the job begins to feel unbearable. And so what else I was told is that whenever possible, all of that grief that's been bottled up and stuck in cans and jars and boxes and whatnot is stacked up, put somewhere, and forgotten about. But they're not really forgotten. I really love the picture on the left because those boxes are numbered. And I suspect whoever numbered those boxes has lists of what's inside them. And I think that we also have mental lists of what's inside whatever we've stored it into because it doesn't go away. And likely it'll spill out, potentially destroying a family and or a career. Some things you may be ready to let go of. Some things, your stuff or your grief that has spilled out can't be contained anymore. It's not just leaking. Leaking is kind of like people aren't always wanting to have lunch with me, because I'm just grumpy. The kind of experience I'm talking about here where things explode and spill out is where you come in and you say something loud and the dog runs away. Not not coming near you, but literally runs into another room. That's a litmus test for this kind of overspill. And grief by its own nature is disorganizing. It disorganizes our life. It's one of the reasons people don't like it. Not only does it feel very sorrowful, not only does it hurt in a variety of ways, but it also isn't organized. And we can't expect it to organize itself. We have to do it with some kind of attention. And that's what we're really trying to work out here tonight. Just a little bit here, I said that in Western society, we do a good job of ignoring grief because we don't know how to deal well with it. And you might have experienced that if you see a drop-off of funerals or even memorial services in your circle where people just don't even recognize and acknowledge the ceremonial and the ritual that goes along with death. And they may not recognize the ceremonial or ritual that goes along with retirement or graduation or marriage or the lack of a marriage. All of those things, when people get together and acknowledge them, go more smoothly. So our society is kind of death denying. It's grief avoidant. It has a lot to do with our all-American individualism and personal sense of independence that leads us away from group support. It's our sense of I can't tell anybody about what I'm doing because they might think less of me. And I suspect that's as big in the fire service as it is in the military. My husband spent 15 years in the military, and I was one of the people who joined the Army. So I know how much that stuff gets ignored. We've seen a few changes for the positive since COVID, insofar as people have started to talk about loss more often. And what some people consider a loss may not be what you or I consider it, but remember that grief is a unique thing for every individual. The thing that we can call as common is that as humans, we will have grief. It will happen. There is, if you get a chance to listen sometime, Anderson Cooper has a lot of podcasts where he's talking with other people about grief. He became fully aware of grief when, I believe it was when his mother died. And often that's what it is. Somebody special to us dies, and we either take it up and work with it and feel with it and become changed by it, or we take the hurt that goes with that loss and we put it away. We have a choice. Another way to think about the grief avoidance, I'm sure you've heard of this, is that some people have sought legislation to stop funeral homes from having funeral processions from a church or from the funeral home to a cemetery, because it's really annoying when everybody has to stop at a green light in order to let a funeral procession go forward. And it's really ridiculous that we can't stop and honor people. People used to get out of the car and stand there as the funeral cortege went by. I have even read about funeral homes that have a drive-through viewing. So just like you would go up to the drive-through bank, or you would go through Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, you drive up to the viewing window, someone opens up the curtain so that you can see the deceased person. You sign a booklet that said that you were there, and you drive on home. You never have to get out of the car. You don't have to get up close to a body. You don't have to do anything, really, to feel what has been lost. And what I think this leads to is a train wreck of what I call bereavement proportions. One woman that I've had the opportunity to work with told me that she had 15 deaths in 7 years. And her partner said, yeah, 15 deaths. You don't even know more than half of those people. And it's true. She didn't know more than half of those people. What happened was she had 3 family members who died in close proximity time-wise, and she didn't have the opportunity to grieve the first family member before the second 2 died. And then life went on, and a neighbor's parent died, or her boss's brother-in-law died, and someone's dog died, and someone else had a death, and someone else had a death, and then someone she knew a little bit died, until she could count them up to 15. And the train wreck for her, the engine always goes off the track in a train wreck. And in this case, the engine went off, and that was those first 3 deaths that she didn't get a chance to grieve. And then the pileup in the back of the other cars are all of the other deaths that felt like hers because she hadn't addressed hers, her own losses. I can't see anybody, so I don't know if you're nodding, but I hope that some of you are saying, I recognize that feeling, or I have seen it in someone before, that something went wrong in the beginning, and an earlier death wasn't addressed in some way, or really hurt in another way, and then others just piled up. Some professionals call that complicated grief. Some call it complex grief, and some call it prolonged grief. And what it really is, in very simple terms, is unmourned grief. It's something that hasn't been taken into the heart and addressed in such a way as to pull the feelings together and integrate it into who I am right now. So I want you to think about, please, whether there is an engine that has gone off the track in your life when it comes to grief and loss. It may be a very old grief, it may not be. Either way, the engine needs attention. Giving the engine attention can help other cars to get that engine. If we get that engine back on the track, we can pull the other cars back into alignment, and each car can be excavated. Another metaphor for looking at this is gardening. If you have a whole yard full of bamboo shoots coming up, you're not going to get rid of them until you get rid of the first bamboo shoots that have sent out their lines of weed underneath the soil. So excavation has to happen in order to figure out how to get rid of these bamboo shoots so that I'm not stepping on them all the time. So let's review what's lost. We have primary losses, and those are the ones that smack us first. It's a death, usually, but not always, a death at home, at work, or somewhere in the world. It is very possible that some of you might be grieving very different situations in the world, different fires. Perhaps it affected you when in 2025 in January, when the Pacific Palisades and the town of Eaton in Los Angeles County burned to cinders. Perhaps it caused you some pain. Perhaps when there's a hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or some other tragedy like a nightclub fire or something that causes you pain. That's the world that you're grieving for then. A primary loss can be the end of a marriage, a family that is ruptured and splintered, and any other relationship that's important to you that has broken. And it could be a relationship at work. And it can be a transition from a home, moving from my home to another house, because a house is what I moved to. I have to make it my home, which is why leaving where I am can be very painful. I'm not leaving a house, I'm leaving a home. If my house has burned down, I have lost a home. It could be a transition from the job, a career, a graduation. We cry at weddings. We cry at graduations. We cry sometimes at baptisms and births. And those too are a transition, and transitions cause us to grieve. Good grief sometimes, but hard. Connected losses are also called secondary losses, and they happen because of the primary loss. And the example I like to use is a fairly simple one. My sister died in 2010, and she was an alcoholic, and she died from alcohol. It was a bad death. And she was unable to take care of her two children, and so they were neglected in a number of ways. So a connected loss to her death was the need to take in one of her children and to follow the other one. And we took in the one child and did all kinds of things that needed to happen. And then knowing that even after spending 3 years with him in our home, there are things that he was still unable to accomplish in the world because of his earlier upbringing. That's a connected or a secondary loss. Those kinds of losses keep coming up. So that years after you've buried the first thing. And this happens with the end of a marriage, when there are children involved, especially. There's always that second connected loss of how to deal with the children when there's been a separation. And when a connected loss emerges, then it can bring the original loss back to mind. So, what is grief? The differences among grief, grieving, and mourning. Each of these words has a specific meaning that's worthwhile for you to know so that you can sort of draw a line in your work life and your daily life to what it is you're seeing. Grief is what people experience when they have a death or another loss. It's usually an internal set of feelings that happens passively. In other words, you can't predict how you're going to respond to any death. You might think you know, but you don't know. Grief typically lasts a lifetime, but it softens over the years. And it especially softens if you work with it intentionally with mourning. Grieving is the process that we have of adapting to the loss. It's a brain process. Well, a heart process too. It's learning how to live without the person or thing, and it's how the brain shifts and changes. And mourning is the external expression of grief. So if grief happens inside us in ways that we can't predict, mourning is something that we tell ourselves that we're going to do. We go to a funeral. We talk about the loss. We wear a black armband. We do a charity run. We do a lot of different things that are mourning activities that help us to express the grief and adapt to the lost. So grief is vital. It's what a lot of people call the true cost of love. And that includes love for your work. And when your love for your work is great and it's expended daily in the energy and efforts you put out there, and there's painful experiences, you may someday feel that heaviness and say, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? Why am I here? Great love is usually a sign that you're going to experience pretty deep grief. And grief, I think, is our sacred right. Our human way to honor our losses. And so when people say, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, baloney. That's what it is to be human. That's living life on its own terms. Grief can lead to growth, transformation, if we allow it. But please know, there's no goal here. You don't have to worry about, oh, I'm not doing it right because I'm not leading to great growth and transformation. No, grief for its own sake is what it is. And if you decide to take it a little further, you may change as a human being into someone that you would like to change into, someone you would like to be more specifically. So grieving. Grief is the noun, grieving is the verb. The process of learning how to live without the loved one who has died or the thing that has been lost. So it can be the process of learning how to live without a marriage that was started, or the process of learning how to live without my mother or a sibling, or whatever. It could be the process of learning how to live without the career when I change careers, which I've had to do. It's how the brain adapts. It's a neurological mapping and rewiring process. So if I go home after my dad died, if I went home and saw the chair that my dad always sat in, and I use that example because a lot of people have a dad who sat in a chair, a particular chair. I go into the house, I see the particular chair, dad's not in the chair, and I'm hit with this very strong feeling that dad should be in the chair. What happened? And I have to reteach myself, oh, dad died. I knew that. I knew dad died. Yeah, we buried him. We buried him last year. So my brain is trying to rewire itself not to expect dad in that chair. I can help that process. I can move the chair. I can put dad's picture in the chair. I can throw the chair away and replace it with a different chair. I can do all kinds of things. I can put some Afghans and blankets in the chair. But until my brain and I get into sync, I'm going to be grieving who needs to be in that chair. And it's not just dad in the chair, it's dad in the kitchen, it's dad doing other things. So it's all a process of the brain and the heart adapting to the loss. And then the process of grieving is mourning. So I have grief, the noun. I do some grieving, and the grieving can last for quite a while. It can last for years. And in order to move that grieving through, I do mourning. Mourning is an active and intentional act or series of acts, things that I do. And you guys are doing people, you're active people. So this should speak to you, I hope. It's externalized. I take it outside myself. It's my social response to loss and grief. So it involves things like talking, crying, writing, jogging if I need to, or going to a memorial, or setting up a memorial, or participating in an ice plunge out at the bay in honor of somebody. It's a purposeful work of grieving, not just something that happens that just, oh, yeah, hey, it just turned out that I did some mourning today. Sometimes that's the case, but it's also purposeful. It's natural, normal, and necessary, but it's not a big thing in our society anymore. And I'm not sure it's a really big thing in first response outside of the initial funeral or ceremony, memorial ceremony, and the ringing of the bells and calling out the job for the last time and so on. So it's something that we need to set up and do maybe more times than one, or more times than three, or more times than six. It requires time, but it also re-energizes us. It brings us back to life and pulls us back into the land of the living. And we can go in and out of mourning, and we can feel grief now and then, but we need to really spend some time with it in order to heal it. So, human realms affected by grief, everything. Your behavior at work, which includes absenteeism and presenteeism. Absenteeism is when you call out work, you just don't show up, and you say, you know, I'm just not up to it. I can't go. Presenteeism is I got to go to work, and I go to work and I'm so bereft. I'm so disturbed that I can't function safely. And that's an important thing to know about myself, because behaviorally, I might need a little bit of help in order to not harm myself or anyone else. Cognitive realm, it has to do with how clearly I can think. And so while when I'm not grieving, I may be the sharpest tool in the drawer. When I am grieving, I might have trouble doing simple math problems. And that is something that I may want to send on to somebody else to take care of. These are just brief examples. Emotions, of course, I can be all over the place. I can have deep sorrow. I can be a little sad. I can be regretful or feel guilty or even ashamed if I did something that I'm not really proud of. I can be all of those things. And I can have happiness. I can have that too. I can laugh and not need to feel guilty about it, although a lot of people do feel guilty when they're laughing. I can have physical issues. Typically, my physical self, my immune system may be discharging all the positives and really struggling when I'm feeling bereaved, when I'm trying to adjust to a loss. I may not sleep as well, or I may want to never get up. I may not eat as well. I may not be able to stop eating. I may have no appetite. I may have no desire to exercise. Or I might want to just put things away and exercise myself as much as I can. Socially, I may want to be around people, but I don't want to be around people. And that is, I always think of that as how we're all a bunch of toddlers sometimes. That's when you really wish somebody would call or text to check in on you. And when that person calls or texts, you look at it and you say, I don't feel like answering that. And you don't answer. And so I want what I want, but I don't want it either. And that is how socially we can get off track. Spiritually, here I'm talking about two things. I'm talking about faith. If you have faith in any way, your faith may grow stronger or it may become more distant. It may change in ways you never expected. And then the other way of thinking spiritually is that grief is a spiritual experience. You can't touch it, you can't taste it, you can't throw it, you can't do any of those things. You can't smell it, but it's there inside you. So it's that spirit that can be dampened. So think about a candle that is snuffed out and the light is gone. And spiritually, then we need to relight that candle to become ourselves again. Heaviness, think of that as the heaviness that we're talking about tonight. That's like a glass that we turn over and we put that over top of the lit candle and it snuffs out all the air around the candle. And without oxygen, the light can't stay. And so the light goes out. Always trying to think, how do I relight that candle? How do I relight my spirit? So here is where I'm going to ask you to jot some things down, and then we'll take a quick break and talk. We're going to look at 4 different kinds of grief or things that people grieve and see if any of them match you. If you did get a chance to open up and maybe print out the handout I sent, I have all of those listed on the handout, and you could put a check mark by them. And if you put a check mark by different types of things that people grieve, then you're going to start to get a sense of whether or not you have an engine that went off the track. And if it did, how many cars might be piled up behind that engine that need to be excavated. So everyday losses, disenfranchised, ambiguous, and moral injury losses. And they may be compounded for people in multi-generational first response families. So if you're one of those people, give yourself a mark right now that says, okay, I'm in a family that has learned from each other how to be first responders. And therefore, we've learned from each other how to feel or not feel certain kinds of loss. So everyday losses that all of us have is normal, everyday stuff. You can't get around it. Parental deaths. So if you have experienced the loss of a parent, or maybe are in the process of experiencing that with some caregiving or someone who has dementia or has a chronic illness of some kind, give yourself some marks for that. If you have the loss of a spouse or a life partner, I have here death, but it may be the loss of a marriage. That's going to come up again under another kind of loss. child deaths are the worst. And typically I don't compare losses because they're unique for everybody, but child deaths pretty much universally slay all of us because it's the opposite of what we want to have happen. We expect that an adult will die before a child will. But if we live life on its own terms, then we know that's not the way it works. A child dies all the time, and it's not going to feel right ever. And it's always traumatic. So as you think about everyday losses and child deaths, you may also need to do a tick mark here if you encounter that in your work. I believe I started with the EMT story of the woman who had 17 deaths in one summer in Atlantic City, the same time she had a miscarriage. Those kinds of things stack up. She had a pretty big train wreck. Sibling deaths. We don't talk about them very much, but siblings are the canary in the mine. They tell us that if someone we grew up with, someone we've always known, has died, we can die too. And so more than parental death, more than just about any other death, they tell us that we are mortal. Extended family death, aunts and uncles. If you don't know what nibblings are, they're your nieces and nephews, grandparents, grandchildren, all of those. Grandchildren's deaths are really, really difficult as well because grandparents who have lost a grandchild are grieving for the grandchild as well as for the pain their children are going through. And then friend deaths as well. And they couldn't be friends at work. They can be friends from childhood. They can be anywhere. So I hope if you needed to, that you made a few notes or tick marks there. Disenfranchised losses are losses that we don't recognize as valid. We don't see them as valid. Generally, in society. That doesn't mean you don't. It doesn't mean that I don't. But it means that very often people will say, oh, well, she was just a. And so the list starts with divorce. Divorces are often considered not a valid loss. And yet, if you think about it, I don't think there are many people who go through the trouble of getting married in order to say, and I expect to be unmarried shortly. They are putting their hopes and dreams publicly out there for others to see. And there's a lot of grief that goes with it. And if an ex-spouse has needs, maybe gets sick and needs the support, that's also disenfranchised. Don't worry about it. You're not married to her anymore. She can have somebody else take care of her. Prenatal loss, so miscarriage, infertility is often not thought of. If any of these have been something that's in your train, then go ahead and put a tick mark. Immigration and emigration, not political. I'm not being political here. I'm talking about the very act of going to a new place or leaving a familiar place can be extremely painful. And you may have had some of that in your background, in your family, generations. Depression and mental illness, they're starting to be seen as something that is a loss. Anything that is LGBTQ, those kinds of relationships are still not honored. Substance use disorder, addiction, moving and other home loss from fires and floods. I had one fire chief tell me, don't forget to tell people that we also grieve, we firefighters also grieve when we couldn't save the house because we know how much the homeowner is going to have lost and how difficult it's going to be for the homeowner to get insurance to pay what they're supposed to pay. Accident responsibility. Oh my God, I turned left once and somebody came from around another car and T-boned me. And it was my fault because I turned left. I felt sick for a very long time about that. My responsibility there. Life transitions, suicide, still something that is disenfranchised. Step parents who died. Maybe you have four parents. Maybe you had step parents that were great and they died. Or you had step parents that were not so great, but they were still a part of your life. And in that regard are very important. Pet loss. A lot of people don't have children, and their pets are everything for them. Adolescent love, sweet 16, elder caregiving relationships, disowned family members. Sadly, that's happening more and more. You might have some family members who have become estranged. Rape, other assault victims, military veterans are often disregarded. Loss of driving privileges, which makes an independent person dependent, especially in a country where we have very bad public transportation. People with lifestyle-based illnesses. So someone with COPD who smoked all his life. Often people will say, well, you smoked. What did you expect? Workplace deaths and traumas. So you may have had something to write down or put a tick mark by in disenfranchised losses. Ambiguous losses, and these particularly affect first responders experiencing someone else's child loss. Again, something that people have told me again and again is one of the most painful things. Countertransference, also called when worlds collide. So you arrive at a call and there is a woman in a dress and a certain kind of sweater that your spouse or your sibling or your mother wears. And then you think, oh my God, this could be her, or this could have been her, or where is she now? That's countertransference, and that kind of a loss can stick with you for a very long time. Line of duty deaths, of course, of course. Suicides of colleagues. This is how do we even know? These ambiguous losses are sometimes deaths, or they may not be deaths, and they may not relate to you directly, but they are unimportant to others. But for you, they hug your heart and make it difficult to figure out how to work with it, how to live with it. Those are the kinds of losses that often get put in those boxes and stacked up in the attic. Mistakes that lead to you being fired or to needing to fire somebody else. Unexpected natural deaths of colleagues. Sometimes people just die. They have a heart attack and they die. And that can floor everyone at work. Mortality salience is the awareness of your own impending death or your own fragility. That is when, like when a sibling dies, when you realize that I too can die. That's a loss of my sense of immortality that I may have carried with me since I was a teenager. And the grief of CISM team peers and other supporters who are connecting with those they support. In other words, you can have vicarious grief. You can grieve the grief of others, and that can make any of your own losses more significant. So maybe there's some of these that you need to write down or otherwise address. Put a tick mark by it. And then finally, for tonight, moral injury losses. Moral injuries often are connected to leadership failures. The leadership has messed up. And I did another talk earlier today, and I used the example of the Pacific Palisades and the Eaton fires of 2025. All kinds of people have been blamed for those fires. And the mayor blames the LAFD leadership, and the LAFD leadership blames the mayor, but the people of Palisades and Eaton blame the firefighters. And so they have that kind of an injury, a moral injury of I did the best, we did what we were supposed to, we did what we were told to do, and so on and so on. And we're being blamed. That's a moral injury. Omission and commission, these are the things that I did that I shouldn't have done, or I didn't do that I should have done. Women often have particular challenges that are usually leadership failures, but also can be related to bullies. The BIPOC responders and civilian challenges, there's a whole lot that goes on in our country right now around Black, Indigenous, and people of color in terms of how they are treated as first responders and in terms of how civilians are treated. So that is one big mess that we won't get into tonight, but you may have experienced that and need to put a tick mark there. The duty and the ability to kill is not generally part of the fire service. However, you will have seen it with your other public safety friends. And then losing the point of the career, that's kind of that heaviness also. That's like, why am I here? What am I doing? This isn't even making sense to me anymore. I don't know why I'm here. So maybe there are some things for you to tick off on that. So this is where I'd like to take a quick break and maybe get some responses in chat or people just saying something. Well, how many losses did you check off? You don't need to tell me, and you don't need to tell everybody, but maybe there's something that kind of stuck with you that we can spend a minute or two on before we talk about what to do to work with this. Unique challenges of first responder grief, experiencing frequent trauma, addressing trauma sufficiently well to continue working. That's where your CISM comes into play. Recognizing that traumatic grief is part of the job. Maybe if that was in the job description, that would be helpful. You're going to grieve, and it's going to hurt, and you can have a full life, and you can get help. Maybe if all of that was in the job description. Define for yourself what hope is, and then grieving and doing. Now, mourning stacked up grief, that's where I was talking with Jeffrey about, looking at those past types of grief, and that's going through what's in that engine. And then doing maintenance mourning, it's we're trying to keep other types of losses from piling up, and then addressing new grief when it comes up. And that's writing it down in your notebook and sticking it in your pocket. I'm going to address this at the end of the shift, making it a habit. So I've already told you that grief is a part of trauma. Not all grief doesn't equal trauma, but they're connected. Not all grief includes trauma. When my 94-year-old grandmother with Alzheimer's died, I grieved, I cried, but it was not traumatic because she was 94 and she had had Alzheimer's for 20 years and she hadn't known us for all that time. What was traumatic was when my father told my grandmother, who didn't know who her son was, that his son, my brother, had died. And she had no idea what was going on. So the trauma to me was watching his pain and his inability to get through to her so that she could help absorb and be with him in pain. So it's different. All trauma includes grief. TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, has definitions for grief and trauma. This may be helpful to you. I did not include that on the handout. So what's the dominant emotion? If you have a picture of love, sadness, or yearning for the loved one, it's likely to be grief. If you're dealing in shock, horror, helplessness, or primal panic, and you're still feeling that, it's likely to be trauma. traumatic grief may have some of those elements in it. What's the rate and change in quality of suffering? If it's not changing, then we've got a problem, and it's very likely to be trauma or traumatic grief. Observe whoever you're thinking about, including yourself. What do I see? Does it hurt, or does it leave the person in helpless horror? And then ask the person what's your, which one it is. Are you hurting? I wouldn't use the word sad. Are you sad? Everybody gets sad. Is this a sorrow for you? Or are you feeling like you're just in horror? And let them try and puzzle that out. Does the experience or emotion change? Which is grief, or does it loop? And that may be trauma. Is any of the talk bittersweet with a sense of connectedness and love there? Or is it an expression of acute suffering that never goes away? So commonly in life, people will experience traumatic grief. People do. But you'll see in the middle here, it's not a very big linkage of trauma and grief. But for first responders, you are dealing with a bigger section or subsection of trauma and grief that link up. And so I think it's really important to take care of yourselves regarding this, that take grief seriously. It's going to happen. It's going to be part of your lives. So make sure it's something that you pay attention to. And just turning my pages here. So what do you do about it as we come close to a close? So CISM addresses trauma first. Those of you who have had a CISM interaction and intervention will know that. The main goal of addressing trauma is to help people live fully and securely in the present. And isn't that the same as living life on its own terms? But being in my body as I do it, because people who are traumatized and have post-traumatic stress tend to be living either in the past, in deep depression, or in the future in anxiety, but they're not in the body and living with what they have right now. Grief connected to trauma must be mourned sufficiently. You don't want to hold on to that stuff. You don't want to put it in a closet where it's going to spill out and cost you a job or a marriage or a friendship or a puppy dog. Mourning traumatic grief leads people to hope and to self-reflection. It's that self-reflection that's going to help you with what I'm calling a do-over or a mulligan, where you get in the second half of your life or the last third of your life or the last quarter of your life, where you get a do-over and you can try something else. We want you to be able to stay at the work that you love, though. So this is how to work with the heaviness that comes on. Grieving intentionally doesn't have to wait until trauma is fully addressed or somehow finished. You don't have to worry about that. And if you don't worry about it, it might be easier to live in the present because you're not worried about, oh, I'm still in my trauma. You can say, yes, I'm having feelings. Some traumas may remain with you for a really long time, but if you put that grief away, stack it up, and not deal with it, it can make the trauma worse. So here we are. I hope you like my photos there. I didn't take them. But the first one on the left is snowflakes. Everyone who's grieving, every human being is a snowflake. And I don't mean it in the way that's nightly used to children in school, but we're all different, we're all unique. But the really cool thing about snowflakes is that when enough snowflakes get together, there's snow. And so while I am unique and different, I also have qualities like everyone else. And so is my grief. My grief is different, it's unique, and it is common and the same. And that's why we can connect and talk about it. What are some other things that you can do? You can engage with animals. It's one of the top things research is showing to be helpful to people who are grieving. We have resonance with animals, and it could be a therapy dog or a comfort pet. It could be a horse. It could be, well, not a lion or a bear, but think about prey animals and predator animals. A horse is a prey animal, and a horse is very aware of predators. Human beings are predators. If you try to approach a horse that you don't know, it doesn't know you, as a prey animal, the horse is going to be very aware of you. And if you give off vibes of anger or guilt, um, any kind of violence, any kind of holding back something that's hard or vicious, it is very likely that that horse will walk away or run away from you. But if you can present yourself as someone who is gentle and capable of putting out positive vibes, that horse is much more likely to stand still while you greet or walk up to you because you're not dangerous. And that's a really good way to think about what's going on with you and what you can change. Self-reflection is really important. Really giving yourself time to figure out who you are with all of this. And I think writing is really helpful. I am not a big journaling person myself, but I do write little essays or little blogs or little poems or something. And I guess you can call that journaling. Grief maps. You started a grief map tonight by putting tick marks by the types of losses that you've had or jotting some of them down. A grief map is a way of understanding the loss history that you have and how your family taught you to grieve and what you do with that grief as an adult and as a first responder. Connection, mutual aid, some kind of peer sharing is really helpful. Grief counseling and coaching is really helpful. If you go to a counselor, please make sure that person has been trained in working with grief, that it's not just that someone has a counseling degree, but has understanding of grief, because it's really easy for people to medicalize grief and say, oh, well, you need some XYZ, antidepressants or whatever else. Grief typically is pretty natural and doesn't require that kind of assistance. Group work, restorative spaces, get away, go camping. Get some other meaningful work outside of your job, in addition to your job. Some kind of pro-social volunteering or charity work. Exercise puts you into your ventral vagal system and, pardon me, engages the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system. EFT is emotional freedom technique or tapping. And that is something that can be really helpful in clearing out some of these old griefs. ASAP is the acute stress adaptive protocol that you can learn and do with your peers. EMDR is pretty well focused only in clinical therapy. So a clinician can learn EMDR, which is eye motion desensitization and reprocessing. These are all very similar types of modalities that can help. They involve touching different parts of our bodies that have to do with energy channels, and they involve the right and the left brain. Humming is something, singing, dancing, all those kinds of things. rituals. We can ritualize many things to help them to heal. And those of you in the hospital setting as well as in the firehouse setting, there's nothing wrong with having quarterly ceremonies for 15 minutes where the names of some people who are lost, who have died, or a brief description of a troubling call are all something that people can meditate on and say a prayer about, if prayer is allowed, or it's just something where people can talk for a few minutes, can be supremely helpful. Get cold, so get that cold shower. And run out into the snow or jump into the bag. Don't, do it safely. And wash off your shift. Do your grief decon so that you are letting go of what you can let go of. When you mourn with social support, you're actually increasing the area that you can share things. Talk as much as you can with people, people who will listen, people who will understand. So, grieving people, it's important to know, may be sorrowful, which is more than just sad, may need to help to reorient to work when they come back from a loss, may need help keeping open lines of communication with supervisors, may need to take some time off or be reassigned to less crucial tasks for a while. Really talk about that with people that you trust, because I know there's a very real worry about whether or not it's safe to tell supervisors that you need a little bit of support. I understand that, and that is something to work out in your own teams. Grief is not a mental illness. It is not a mental illness. It is not a mental illness. I can't tell you that enough. It's natural, normal, and necessary, and everybody except for, except for certain kinds of criminals will feel it. So living life on its own terms equals having joy and sorrow, but not endless suffering. I don't want you to have endless suffering, and I know you don't want it either. These are the resources that are listed among some other resources in the handout that has been shared. So I'm stopping the sharing, and I know that we're at 8:30, a little bit past, but I'm here and will stay for a while if anybody wants to chat about what it is we've talked about tonight and what it is you've learned, or if you have questions. I'm seeing in the chat, although CISM and CISM has been used for decades, the evidence for effectiveness has been mostly anecdotal and not standardized. Well, those metadata studies, I'm familiar with them. CISM is not meant to happen in a hospitalized setting, and I think that's where some of those studies were done. And so it's important to make sure that yes, it's important to have evidence-based medicine. The kinds of things that I've shared with you today are evidence-based bereavement care or traumatic bereavement care, or trauma-informed.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is a very important topic. I can't stress it enough. The help is there. All you have to do is ask. You can go within your station. You can reach out to supervisors outside your station. And that's not just in Baltimore County. I'm sure that's in every jurisdiction.
I'm here. I'm happy to help people. There's a really nice bereavement group of therapists as well available in the Baltimore area. Those of you who are dealing with caregiving and loss of people you love through caregiving, Gilchrist hospice does not require that you have used them in order to be able to use their grief counselors. And so if you have that kind of a need as well, they will do 6 sessions with you at no cost.
People see a lot of bad in this job, but on the other side, they see and do a lot of good. And I think that helps.
Yeah.
Works okay.
Yeah. It's not an easy life that you've chosen, but it's a good life.
Mhm.
There was a statewide CSD team, but I don't know if it's still active. And I don't know. Okay, does anyone else have any questions? I can hop off if you all want to talk among yourselves.
Mm. People are at this time, I think, are signing in for some people get CME credit for MIMS for their EMT and their paramedic.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, then I'll tell you what, everybody, thank you kindly for spending time with me tonight and inviting me in. You have my contact information if you want to chat. And I hope that this was helpful. And I so much appreciate all that you do. So
Thank you for coming.
you're welcome. Bye bye, everyone. Good
Take
night.
care.